The Thursday, January 9th, 2020, regular meeting of the Brisbane Planning Commission will now come to order. May I have roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Gomez.
Here.
Commissioner Gooding.
Here.
Commissioner Patel.
Here.
Commissioner Mackin.
Here.
And Chair Sayasan.
Here. Adoption of the agenda. May I have a motion to adopt, please?
I make a motion that we adopt the agenda. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Consent calendar. Is there anyone who would like to remove an item from the consent calendar? I see no one. May I have a motion to adopt?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oral communications. Is there anyone who would like to address the commission about an item that's not on tonight's agenda? I see no one. I'll turn to written communications. We have two emails here, one from Sarah Duffy and another from Cher GS concerning the cannabis dispensary issue. And I also have the latest Bay Area Monitor publication. Okay, and next item is new business. Tonight we have a public hearing concerning zoning text amendment RZ-2-19. It's a zoning text amendments to adopt regulations for short-term residential rentals by adding a new chapter 17.35 to the Brisbane Municipal Code. The City of Brisbane is the applicant. Staff, may we have the report?
Yes, thank you. And the lights a little here. As you all know, Senior Planner Ayers is the lead planner for this city-initiated zoning text amendment. Unfortunately, she had to go for an eye surgery earlier today and could not be here tonight. So I'll be presenting a brief report on this item, and then we'd like to open the public hearing so that those in the public that like to speak have an opportunity to do so. And then we'll be recommending that this item be continued then for the public hearing to be continued and deliberations on the second meeting of February is what we're looking at. And so first, though, tonight I'll give a brief staff report and I'll talk briefly about the background and outline the key issues to be addressed by the ordinance. And so first, by way of background, short-term rentals are rentals of dwellings or portions of a dwelling unit for less than 30 days at a time. They are not currently permitted in the residential zoning districts in Brisbane. However, the advent of web-based short-term rental listing sites has made it much easier for marketing of those rentals really nationwide and around the world. And so such rentals have become more prevalent in recent years. The study into how to regulate short-term rentals in Brisbane arose from a code complaint going back to 2014. Since that time, City Council and the Planning Commission have studied the issue through a number of means, including workshops, community surveys, stakeholder conversations, and public meetings. On February 7th of last year, City Council formally initiated the zoning text amendment to allow limited short-term rentals in residential dwellings subject to a permit requirement and operating limitations. That background, agenda report, and the associated reference information was provided along with your agenda report for tonight's meeting. In brief, the draft ordinance before the Commission tonight incorporates direction from the City Council as well as feedback from the Commission's workshop last June, as well as the community survey and community stakeholder conversation that were conducted this last summer. So I'll provide a brief outline of how the draft ordinance provisions would address a handful of key questions, and these were addressed in more detail in your written report. So first, on the question of who may host, the draft ordinance would allow short-term rentals only in single-family dwellings by permanent occupants of the dwelling who reside there for at least 6 months out of the year. If the host is a tenant and not the owner, the ordinance would require a host to provide notarized authorization by the property owner. The ordinance would require the host to provide evidence that the dwelling is their permanent residence, such as utility bill, driver's license, credit card statement, or other such documentation. On the second question, a permit would be required for anyone to operate a short-term rental. Applications would be subject to zoning administrator review and approval. The prospective host would submit a permit application to the city containing detailed information about the proposed short-term rental and demonstrating their permanent residency in the dwelling. Once an application is deemed complete, the zoning administrator would mail a notice of the application to occupants and owners of adjacent properties. Neighbors would then have 21 days to provide written comments to the zoning administrator before the action would be taken on the permit. Each permit would be valid for 2 years. The zoning administrator could renew the permit also, and it may be renewed for another 2 years or a lesser period of time at the zoning administrator's discretion. Notice of the renewal would again be mailed to the adjacent property occupants and owners. Alternatively, the zoning administrator may suspend a permit or revoke a permit due to violations. On the question of allowing, I bumped a button there. Bear with me. Going dark. On the question of allowing for short-term rentals as accessory dwelling units, the city's intent for accessory dwelling units, or ADUs they're referred to as, is to provide for long-term housing, and this is consistent with recent state law. So short-term rentals would be allowed only in ADUs that were legally established before April 1st of 2017. That's the date that the first amendments to the city's ADU laws became effective pursuant to the new state laws on ADUs. Concerns were raised during the previous meetings about unhosted stays and accountability over such things as noise and potential impacts on neighbors. An unhosted stay is, of course, where a host is not present on the property at the time of the rental. The draft ordinance would cap unhosted stays at no more than 60 days a year. For a permit application allowing for unhosted stays, the applicant would be required to provide at least one local contact person who would be responsible for receiving and responding to complaints should they arise. On the other hand, hosted stays would not be limited to a certain number of days per year. On the rules that would apply, there are a number of operational rules that are provided in the ordinance to address quality of life concerns for residents in the vicinity of the short-term rental. These address such things as quiet hours, number of guests, and so on, and I won't go through all those, but they're provided in detail in the ordinance. On how it would be enforced, unless otherwise directed by City Council, staff would continue to approach enforcement similarly to other complaint-based code enforcement activities. And the ordinance would establish that a violation would be an infraction under Title I of the Municipal Code, subject to fines and other provisions. They could be raised to misdemeanor levels as well. And finally, I should mention there were a couple errata items that were noted in a supplemental memo that you all should have on the desk there. Those items would be corrected when this comes back to the Commission. So in closing, as I mentioned at the start, staff recommends opening the public hearing to receive public comment and then continuing it to another night, and we'd recommend that would be date specific to February 27th, and that's given other scheduling items in between that time, so it's about a month and a half out.
Thank you, Ken. Okay, so we will open the public hearing now and take comments from anybody who would like to speak, and we will start off with Prem Lau.
Good evening, Madam Chairperson, Commissioners. I am Prem Lau, Brisbane resident, and I have two articles that I wanted to bring forth this evening. The first one is actually from October, and I submitted it to the City Council a few weeks ago. It's from a publication that isn't well known called Illicit Trade News Network, and it's about crime with regard to Airbnb and short-term rentals. The second is from December 26, 2019, just a few days ago, and it is from the Wall Street Journal, and it backs up essentially the information from the first article. So there are a few elements of each that I'm going to read to you. So the first article is called Illicit Trade News Network as Airbnb Continues to Profit from the Global Sex Trafficking Trade. And once again, this is from October 2019. Although short-term rental properties such as those offered via Airbnb can be useful to those carrying out a number of illegal activities, they have recently become most synonymous with human trafficking and prostitution, with organized criminal gangs increasingly turning temporary accommodation into so-called pop-up brothels, not only helping sex workers and the pimps and gangs that control them reach a larger number of potential customers through escort sites, but also by allowing them to avoid the attention of law enforcement agencies by arranging short-term lets online to turn into pop-up brothels. Unfortunately for the company Airbnb, the problem has become a global one, with Airbnb properties the world over apparently being used for the purposes of prostitution. In 2017, with regard to the British police, they had warned that human traffickers were renting out Airbnb properties across the United Kingdom before advertising the services of prostitutes put to work in them online. And Sergeant Matt Putuk, the tactical lead for sexual exploitation in the Gloucestershire Police, said these are by their nature often quite hidden places. It's very transient, and they often hire Airbnb places or other serviced apartments. For its part, Airbnb does at least appear to be attempting to address the problem with the launch of its partnership with Polaris and the establishment of its law enforcement agency portal. Commendable as both of these endeavors may be, however, neither will likely have any real impact on the number of the firm's rentals that are used as pop-up brothels, and will do little to protect the vulnerable women and girls who are exploited in the properties whose letting out the firm profits from so handsomely. So that was from the first article. The second article is from the Wall Street Journal, and it is entitled Shooting, Sex Crime, and Theft. Airbnb takes halting steps to protect its users. And the subtitle is Employees Who Pushed for More Stringent Safety Measures Were Overruled. And some of the excerpts are, an ID requirement might deter bad actors, the employees of Airbnb argued. But after heated debate, other company executives, including co-founder and chief executive Brian Chesky, rejected it. Airbnb had studied the issue and found that some users would stop signing up if asked to produce ID, said the people familiar with the discussions. How much responsibility should companies assume for bad things that happen on their platforms? Margaret Richardson, Airbnb's vice president of trust, said that requiring all members to provide government ID would exclude some Airbnb members who don't have them, like those in some developing countries. She said the company has its own systems for verifying identities, which relies on phone numbers, social media accounts, and payment instruments. This is the challenge of the internet era, she said. How do people's online identities and offline identities, how do you match them? Airbnb declined to make Mr. Chesky available for comment. The Wall Street Journal looked at data from several cities that require short-term rental licenses, then cross-checked those addresses against police records. There were hundreds of instances of crimes at licensed short-term rental properties on platforms such as Airbnb, including burglaries, sexual assaults, and murders. Some occurred at properties that had been subject to previous police activity or involved individuals with prior police records. In Minnetonka, Minnesota, Airbnb guest Derek Kinchin climbed into bed with the 7-year-old daughter of the Airbnb family hosting him in September 2017, according to the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. The girl's father walked in to find the girl's nightgown pulled up and Mr. Kinchin lying next to her naked and aroused. The father immediately called the police. Mr. Kinchin was charged with second-degree criminal sexual conduct of a victim under 13. Mr. Kinchin had an extensive criminal record over the prior decade, including at least
Excuse
four...
me, Mr. Lau, excuse me. I don't want to interrupt, but can you summarize it rather than get into the details of those specific cases and kind of...
Well, essentially, what the articles are about, and I'm going to forward these to you,
Okay.
is that Airbnb and other companies like it, they don't have any real means to enforce anything. And all of these crimes are being dumped into the hands of the cities in which their Airbnb units or VRBO units or what have you operate. And I don't really see any means by which the city of Brisbane is going to enforce the kinds of rules necessary to keep these crimes from happening in our city. I really don't see anything like that. I mean, I see enforcement issues as far as how to keep people from, say, renting more than 60 days or something like that. But how do you plan to deal with all of these other crime-related issues from Airbnb that is known now worldwide and is being reported even by the Wall Street Journal? I just don't see it. I don't know how you're going to deal with this. And essentially that's all going to be dumped in our lap.
Thank you for your comments.
Sure.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Thank you. Thank you. Please state your name.
Hi, I'm Jerry Sully, and I live at 4 Margaret Avenue in Brisbane. And there are about 3 Airbnbs within a block of our house. And when it first started up, it was very disruptive. People with matched luggage at 6 in the morning walking down the street, Uber drivers, people stopped in front of our house trying to find the Airbnb and talking on their phone. And then it kind of calmed down. But then last night, 1 o'clock in the morning, guy out in the, stopped in front, our dogs barking, was very disruptive. And I just wondered, one of the things I would sure like is if there could be a limit, a time limit for check-in, like at 10 o'clock instead of 1 or 2 in the morning. The people up the street have a lockbox, so it doesn't matter what time the people get there, they can just get the key and go in. But, we live on a private road, and it used to be kind of quiet, but I just wondered if you would consider that. I don't know if it's too late to put a time limit in, or I didn't read the whole report.
Yeah. Ken, I believe there is, correct?
Through the chair, yes, there is a time limit. In my recollection, it's 10 o'clock. I can double check that.
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
May I permit a question?
Sure.
Could you tell me, do you happen to know whether that house is doing hosted or unhosted rentals?
I believe that people live there, and there's a portion of the house that they allow to be an Airbnb. So,
but are they usually there, to your knowledge, when, say, you have people arriving at different hours? Do you have any idea whether the homeowners are always there when they've got guests?
No, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Well, they rent the house.
The hosts?
Yeah, they rent the house.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please.
Hello, thank you very much. Joe Sully, 4 Margaret, 70-year resident of Brisbane, and I've had rentals here for over 50 years. I'm a little tired tonight because last night was the second night this week. Unfortunately, our house is right on the street. Although we have 270 feet of street frontage, 6 lots, and 6 houses in that neighborhood, our house and our bedroom is right on the road. So that's the second night this week that after 1 in the morning, somebody drove up our private road, stopped in front of our house with their car idling while somebody got out to look on the phone, because even though the listing is at 250 Kings Road, what they've designated in their ad, my kids tell me, is that to go up Margaret and park on Margaret, but they don't know where they are. The people have 250 Kings on their back driveway, but we've had people come at 3:30 in the morning, luggage at 3, 4 in the morning, but everybody always stops in the middle of the road. I mean, it's dark. We don't have any street lights. It's literally in front of our house. The road's 14 foot wide. So they just stop there while the dog barks and somebody walks up the street while they're trying to call. And it's a situation where it was a single family residence, and what's happened with the permission of the owners, a lady took it over and she literally lives in an undeveloped basement kind of area, brick, no insulation, no heat, and she rents the two rooms upstairs. So that's right across the street from our house. But at $117 a night, there's people coming in and out of there, ever since they've started it. And, even though we've spent thousands of dollars fixing our road, I was told by the city that I can't permit people from parking in front of it. Luckily, I have a car in the garage now. We clean the garage out, and they can't block my garage. But, yeah, I don't know, if it would be 10 o'clock, that would be great, because most people that come, whether it's by Uber or driving their own car, they're coming 11, 12, 3:30 in the morning, whatever. When does the flight come in from Germany or wherever these people are? So, yeah, we would ask that, if you could at least do that, if it's not going to be owner occupied, but if there could be a time constraint. Thank you so much for your consideration. Thank you. Yes.
So assume it is 10 o'clock at night. What do you envision happening if someone comes in at like 11?
Well, I guess more that's, what he was saying. What do you envision? Can you call the police? Oh, I'm going to fill out a little form and bring it down to City Hall the next day? Is that the way the complaint about it's going to work? And, we don't seem to. We have a code enforcement officer, but there again, I'm retired. I spend a lot of time walking around town. I was born and raised in this town. I walk the streets every day. And there's this stuff that I thought we had a special person to deal with code enforcement, but there's a lot of stuff that's not being addressed, whether it's out-of-state cars that are parked on the street, properties that just, everybody lives in $1 million neighborhood now. My houses that I paid $10,000 for are worth millions, but yet have neighbors that cars that are abandoned, sailboats. It's disgraceful. Really, I don't want to be a whiner, but at some point we should have somebody take care of things. So I don't know. When I have a complaint, and there again, where's square one? Do I complain about these people that they're going to come down and fill out the little permit? And if there isn't any enforcement, we're just wasting everybody's time. I don't know about that part of it. All I know is we're in our 70s and we're losing a lot of sleep behind what's going on in the neighborhood, and what's going down next to this gentleman's house down here is just outrageous.
So if you do call, let's say it happens once and you don't know who to call, apparently is what you're telling me.
Well, the way I hear who would you call now? I've talked to the mayor, I've talked to the chief of police. I'm on first name basis with these people, obviously, but
so
everybody's hands is tied.
So it seems as though
that would be the first thing is, okay, well, we have some paperwork now. How do we initiate this? Me as a resident, who do I whine to more than?
So it seems as though there's no clarity as to who exactly you would call. And then, assuming it happens twice or 3 times or 4 times, how do you figure out how to get it to stop?
Yeah. Good, who do I get to talk to about that? I don't know. Like I said, I'm just an old guy that's been here since the cows were down here, Thanks so much.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no.
Well, I just want to clarify for the gentleman that the proposed ordinance does say check-in time is from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. And your concerns about enforcement and how do you submit your complaints and stuff, that is something we will be asking staff to address. So we're thinking about it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yes, Mr. Gomez.
Just some additional comments from the previous comments and Joe's comments, and that what I'm seeing here is that, and I can't speak to the fine details, that under this draft ordinance, it would establish that a violation of the ordinance is an infraction under Title I of the Municipal Code, subject to fines and provisions for enhancement to misdemeanors contained in Chapter 1.14.
And also that their permit might be revoked or...
Yeah, so I guess the broader question, and this is kind of the previous comments also, is I don't think we have any kind of, I'll just say, data or crime statistics around Airbnb activity in town. I guess that's a question mark, and that's one of the reasons why we're going down this path, I think, to try and put some regulatory framework around.
Well, I'm on a local level. I'm seeing the impact of it as a resident here. You know, I'm getting to the point. There's a whole lot of stuff going on out of town, around the world. What's going on in town, I don't know. But you know, all I know is a lot of people I've talked to, their quality of life is being impacted, whether it's parking or just that, you know. I mean, I used to have great horned owls roaming my neighborhood. Now I got Airbnb, people holding their phone up. Hi, can you hear me? Where do I go? Well, I got my dog, and she's not real happy about it. Great. Thank you so much. We appreciate the time limit thing, but having a way to make sure that the people do it. I mean, there needs some kind of fight.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Hi, my name is James Cito. I live in Kings Road also, and I live next to a house that have been Airbnb for, I would say, over 2 years now. It's a large house. I think there's a accessory dwelling unit. The owners live in the accessory dwelling unit, and they rent out the upstairs. It's probably I think the home could probably take in a capacity over 20 or 30 people or more. I would say it's been like almost every week that there's a party going on. There's always cars parked everywhere. We don't have any more parking outside anymore. Just coming to this meeting today, I looked outside. There's no more parking. I built my home. The city required me to build 4 parking spaces in addition for the public parking. Now there's no more parking. It's just ridiculous. Not only that, I had to call the police a number of times for noise. There's times where trash is left outside. At this point, I mean, I don't understand. We don't even know our neighbors anymore by having all these Airbnbs. My neighbor who rents it out, I don't even know them. Yeah, you're right over there. And one of the things, how come you don't put a one-night...
Sir,
excuse me.
Please address the commission.
Okay, one of the main issues I have is that if you're going to rent out the place, why don't you at least put a 2-night minimum so we don't have partiers? There have been cases where there's actually a party bus in front of our street. Thank you.
Sir, I just wanted to comment on what you've said, and what we're doing here, those types of behavior will not be allowed, and we will be discussing how we enforce that better, because what you're enduring, I'm absolutely shocked actually that that's occurring. So believe me, you know, when we're going through this ordinance, those are types of behaviors that we will not allow. So,
I mean,
may I ask a question? So when you called the police about noise, did you see the police respond?
Yeah, they came and told them to stop.
Okay, and do you know if they were cited?
I don't know. I don't think so, because I called a number of times for, there's a few times, there were so many cars that the whole street, San Mateo Lane, it was there was a whole street full of illegally parked cars that wasn't in the white line.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, the police came, knocked on my neighbor's door, and told the guests to move their car. The police didn't cite them, didn't do anything.
Do you know?
That was actually 2 times.
Right, and this is not your job, so I'm not implying that. But do you happen to know at least one time did they ever talk to the actual homeowners that live in the ADU?
I don't think so, because
they may have
the main
talked,
unit, which
right.
was the people renting the unit.
Okay, so you never heard back next day or subsequent to that from the police?
Nope, I never heard anything from the police. I made reports to Airbnb.
Right.
They didn't even call me back. They didn't even care. It was so ridiculous. They basically didn't even acknowledge me.
Hmm. Did you say this was going on for 2 years?
Yeah, it's been going on for a while. Yeah, you can ask Joe and Jerry.
Okay. Did you ever happen to call code enforcement?
Yes, code enforcement said since we don't have any regulations on Airbnb, there's nothing they can do. Yeah, they said as long as, basically they can't do anything.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I complained about the garbage cans.
Sir, if you want to speak again, you could come up. Yes, please.
Yes, there again, Joe Sully from Margaret, just a block from Kings and this 150 Kings Road. I talked to the code enforcement officer. I'm bad with names. I forget her name. I have her card. Michelle, is that her name? Ooh, all right. Anyway, I talked to Michelle, and she informed me that garbage cans are supposed to be off the street within 12 hours after pickup. But their cans block 2 public parking places generally because they're out in the street. They're there all week long. I've moved them a half a dozen times so that I can park. I have 5 rental houses. I don't do Airbnb, but we have a bunch of properties. And my tenants can't park. Their neighbors can't park. But I have talked to Michelle about the garbage can issue and seen 20 people, on the deck with the hot tub. And that poor neighbor, he has young children and things just going on in our neighborhood that, you say, come on up sometime. Like you said, right now, it's going on up there right now. Yeah, there's the whole neighborhood's full of vehicles that are at that guy's house.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, Commissioner, Chairperson. My name is Philip Reichart. I'm the owner and resident of 150 Kings that was previously mentioned. I actually came here to really congratulate you on the rules. I think it's overall, very progressive and great way of thinking about how to regulate Airbnbs. The vast majority of the proposals, I think, are spot on. I applaud the comment on the time limit on check-in, check-out. Absolutely in favor of that. The limits, the regulations around it being your permanent residence make perfect sense. We don't want this to turn into Hotelville or anything like that. I want to specifically address the previous comments because they were talking about my property. Yes, we have been renting it out on Airbnb. Last year we had 48 nights that were rented upstairs in the whole house essentially. That is because due to my job, I am spending a lot of time abroad. Total of 3 months last year, and part of that I rented out the entire house. During some of those nights, especially when it's overlapping my arrival back into Brisbane, I have stayed in the accessory dwelling unit while it's, maybe there was an overlap of a few days, and then I would move back up. I have 2 small kids as well, so we're not living in a 1-bedroom as an accessory dwelling unit, but occasionally we have stayed there. The rest of the time we have rented out the ADU on Airbnb. The days that it's not used, we also use it quite a bit for my mother-in-law. So some people go on to granny unit. That's exactly what we did. The year before last year, she actually stayed there for 7 months, and then the rest of the time we rented it out. The times that the police were called due to noise complaints and the recent issue with the parking was actually my son's 6-year-old birthday party. And then we couldn't have a birthday party for him during his actual birthday because we were out of town. So we combined it with my other son's 4-year-old birthday party. As a result, there were a lot of guests over. I totally didn't pay attention. And yes, they parked illegally. It was not an Airbnb-related event. The event tonight is our friends of ours staying there. My wife is actually up there right now. Not an Airbnb event. So yes, it's an Airbnb thing sometimes. I feel like there's a confusion, and especially with the larger events, like somebody mentioned a bus. There was never a party bus. Okay, yeah. If there are pictures, great. I would like to see it. But I feel like those are events that are not Airbnb, has nothing to do with renting it out on Airbnb. So if there's a general concern about me having too many people over and how they park and where they park, happy to address that. And if you look at the Airbnb listing, it very clearly states that there's a maximum of 4 spots available, because those are the spots in front of my garage and on the side of my property. And also, I believe in the in the proposal, there's a notion around how many guests you're allowed to have and how many parking spots need to be available. So yes, I think it addresses that. Now, the other comment earlier around increases in crimes, I think Airbnb recently changed their rules around the requirements to become a renter, where they changed their previous position on the requirement for IDs. So from Airbnb itself, now, today, you can no longer be host or rent without providing a government-issued ID. So I think that probably was in response to some of the reporting that was done that the gentleman read earlier. What I wanted to address today was some of the I guess, comments or proposals that came forth related to 2 things. One is the accessory dwelling unit. As I explained earlier, we are renting out our accessory dwelling unit on Airbnb when it's not used. For us as a family, it's not an option to rent out the accessory dwelling unit as a long-term residence. The reason being is that A, it's not properly insulated, I should say, where there's noise when the kids run around during the day upstairs. So a regular renter would probably not feel comfortable staying there. Airbnb guests, on the other hand, they're not there during the day, so that has not been an issue. And second reason is we are using it personally for our mother-in-law who comes here. She lives in South America, comes up here for extended periods of time. She usually stays down there. The second rule around, there was a limit on the number of guests per bedroom and the number of bedrooms. So that seemed a bit odd, and I wanted to understand where that was coming from, why the community feels that is important. I feel it's very hard to enforce as a host to say you are only allowed to have 2 people in 1 bedroom, and what if they have a baby? How do you ever look at that? If that's coming from a wish to limit the parking impact, I think that's a good point. Maybe there's other ways to address that in the regulation, where we have hosts make a very clear statement around the limits of cars that are allowed, similar type of things. So that was one concern I had, in addition to that.
Regarding that, children are not included in the 2 adult limit per room.
Okay, good. That's good. Still, why only 2 rooms? Would I have to install locks on the other rooms? How do I keep people from not using them? Why not 3 rooms? Why 2? And why not 3 people per bedroom instead of 2? Again, I'm 100% opposed and in agreement with the whole party house situation. I don't want my house to be used as a party house at all. Really not my... why would I... Yeah, it's not my plan. I do like hosting parties for my own personal use because I know who's coming, but that's not for rental purposes.
So I have a threshold question about this, which is, if currently, under the current state of the law, before the city council does anything, if short-term rentals are not allowed or permitted in Brisbane, why are you doing it?
So I have
called... Are you aware that it's currently not permitted in Brisbane?
Yes. And
you've been doing it for How long now?
3 years.
Okay. Why?
Why I got into Airbnb. Bought the house thinking that I would rent out the ADU permanently. What I didn't know and realized when I bought the house was that you can hear a pin drop in the ADU when you're upstairs. And so I looked in, and my friends recommended, why don't you look into Airbnb? The main issue was the kids running around during the day. And the point here was, well, Airbnb guests, they're either working at work or they're exploring the city. So you may not have the issue of kids running around, so that noise issue might not be.
So I think it's a different question. I think Commissioner Gooding's asking a different question. He's asking you, why are you breaking the law?
Right.
Got it. So I was getting that. That's how I even got into
the question about insulate, but question about noise. I'm going to ask.
I understand.
I'm going to ask you in a minute after you answer the question.
Answer your question.
After you answer the question about why you're breaking the law, I'm going to ask you why don't you insulate the ADU so it's usable as an ADU. But answer the first question first.
Got it. So I actually called the city, and I spoke to I forgot who it was, who said that it's not currently enforced. There's not an issue, as long as you live there permanently. And they actually asked me, do you live there permanently? Is this your permanent house? Or did you buy the house just to put it on Airbnb? And obviously I live there for way more than 6 months a year. So I was made to believe that while the ordinance is being formulated, it's quote-unquote okay to rent out my house on Airbnb. Additionally, looking up Brisbane on Airbnb.com, there's a lot of rentals on Airbnb. I'm happy, more than happy to address any of the concerns that people would have with the Airbnb, and part of the reason that I came here was to applaud you on the proposal, because I think it addresses some of the concerns and maybe makes it a more palatable situation. So, second question, why didn't I insulate? Just because I was quoted $18,000 and I didn't have the money after buying the house to insulate. Now, I might change my mind about this and end up doing it after I'm no longer allowed to rent out the accessory dwelling unit. But,
do you know when that ADU was installed in your particular house?
Way before the cutoff, yes.
Do you know if that's a legal ADU, or is it
it's
just
a
granny?
Permitted, yes.
But I mean, was it actually put through the city as a legal ADU versus an in-law or granny flat, which never went through
I'm not sure.
inspection
I wasn't aware that there was a difference.
Yes, there is.
Then I would have to do my research. But it's properly zoned, has a separate address. It has a separate meter. I mean, I would assume it definitely went through some kind of permitting process.
Through the chair, without tormenting people who come up to the podium with questions about legality. I would just let them speak. I think, but on the subject of the ADU, I believe this property is one that I processed as an ADU 4 or 5 years ago, if I recall right.
Well, I think it's important to sort of question why people would do something illegally, just to get their motivations. I don't think we're trying to grill him as to what he's doing legally or illegally.
I think what he's saying, his interactions with the city track with what my understanding has been, and I prefer to lean on Julia and John, who've been tracking this whole. We've been 5 years now in the making or so, since 2014 on that first code complaint, and it did go to council, and then it was shelved. Not shelved really, but it was like, we need to come back to this.
Well, what I'm saying is I don't think that people here knew that the city staff was telling people that it was okay to have Airbnbs.
Right, and I'd prefer not to speak to that. I think if we want to delve into that,
that's fine. But what I'm saying is,
so it gets into this sort of a back and forth with.
I don't believe it's a back and forth, and I don't think that we're asking him questions that are inappropriate. I think that we're trying to figure out what's being told to people that are doing Airbnbs, and I think it's new information that we're getting, that city staff is telling people that it's okay to have Airbnbs, when I think a lot of people thought that that was not allowed. So to that extent, I think it's important information for everyone to know. The question I have for you also is this: is you indicated that you were out of town for 48 days last year. Is that correct? Or you rented out?
I was out of town for a bit over 3 months. And
okay. And during
those 48 days, it was rented. Yes.
And during that time, was anyone that's a permanent resident of your residence at the house while you're doing Airbnb?
A few days, but not the majority.
So as you're renting out your property on Airbnb, how is it that you could monitor whether, for example, there was a party bus or whether people were doing sort of these party type situations?
Yes. So I have outside cameras installed that look at the driveway and that look at the back door, which is sometimes used by people to get into the house, and at the front door outside of the property, of course, not inside. So very easy to track the number of cars, the number of people going in and out. I also have a neighbor who lives on Humboldt who very frequently checks on it and makes sure that there's nothing going on. Especially, I have decimal meters inside the unit, which was prompted by very, very early on a party that was happening. So there was one party, which I don't think I mentioned, maybe 3 years ago, where I didn't have these measures in place. But since then, to the best of my knowledge, there was no issue ever. So cameras, decimal meter. We also have a CO2 meter inside the house, again for the same purpose, because it tracks how many people are present at any given time due to the CO2 that people emit. So I'm very confident in saying that there's no illegally hosted party at my house that's happening unless I'm there. I mean, yes, we have hosted events and parties, and the vast majority of them do not go past 10 p.m. But again, if there was an issue with an Airbnb guest throwing a party, I would want to be the first to know and do something about it. So one of the proposals here in the ordinance is to have a local point of contact that neighbors could call. We have. I love that. It's a great idea, especially when I'm not around. I will kick out anybody that throws a party at my house within a heartbeat. No question about it. Similarly, if somebody feels that I am being too loud or that my personal guests, are parked illegally, which that happened as well, I'm happy to address that even through the same number and same telephone number, phone call, which is exactly what we did during the last incident that the neighbor mentioned, which was my son's birthday party. Like, the police did show up and asked people to move their cars. It was actually during a magic show that was performed, so I ended up moving the cars for a lot of people. And yes, they were parked illegally. It was not okay. It had nothing to do with Airbnb, however. So, all in all, I think this is a really, as I said before, straightforward and positive thing for the city, because it addresses a lot of the concerns that I have heard before, that I heard today. I'm in favor of all of them, besides the two that I mentioned earlier, which I question around. How does this contribute to the concerns that we are addressing around parking and then number of guests, etc.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Hello, it's Prem Lau again. First of all, just to follow up on what was just said, I really would also like to know who in city government is telling people things are okay when they're illegal. That really needs to be known. Secondly, I have a question with regard to accessory dwelling units. I noticed that in the draft ordinance, it refers to how the goal of ADUs is to increase availability of long-term residential renting, essentially. But how do you prevent somebody who has a home and then adds an ADU from moving from their home temporarily into their ADU and renting out their home for Airbnb and doing it on a regular basis. Is there any means to prevent that, or is that just going to be accepted as something they can do?
So currently, I think the draft statute says that there's a time limit as to if there was a ADU that was drafted after a certain period of time where there was expedited permitting, that you can't rent the ADU out. However, it doesn't address your question of can the homeowner then move into the ADU and then rent out the house, which is basically just the loophole.
Right, and essentially that doesn't help to increase housing at all. It does nothing. It just, I mean, it's just pointless, essentially.
Right.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak? Mr. Cito.
Mr. Cito, I have a question. Regarding the size of these Airbnbs, is there a limit to, let's say my neighbor here, he does have a big house. He wants to rent up the whole upstairs. I mean, now I have parties every weekend. Is there a limit to the size?
Yes, the draft ordinance does have language on that.
Okay, what is the language of
Well, currently, it really depends on if the it's a hosted or unhosted stay. There's different language. If it's a hosted stay, I believe it's the unlimited habitable rooms. But if it's unhosted, it's just no. If it's unhosted, it's whatever amount of habitable rooms that's available. If it's hosted, it's 2 rooms.
Hosted 2 rooms. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I see no one. May I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Actually, through the chair, I think
sorry, yes.
we'll just continue.
We're going to continue. Yes.
Continue the public hearing to the date specific.
Okay, so we will continue the hearing till February, I believe, what was the date?
27th.
Yes, 27th. Okay, so now we can.
Do you want me to make a motion to close the public hearing to be continued to a later date?
I think how the chair just stated it is that we will continue the public hearing to February 27th.
Okay, so now since it's going to be continued, I don't think we really need to get into like an in-depth debate, but if we have questions regarding the draft ordinance, I think it'd be a good idea for each of us to kind of give them to staff so that they can research it, and then when we come back for the hearing, that they can have the information for us. So, because I know I have some questions. I think there's probably others here that have questions, so maybe we can do that. So, you want to start, Commissioner Gomez? Do you have any questions for staff?
I have more philosophical comments. I don't know if they're helpful, to be quite honest. Airbnb's been around for a decade. 2020, right? To your points around crime, and is there a correlation in the city of Brisbane with Airbnb activity and crime? Can anyone answer that question? Or increasing the likelihood? I don't know. I know we're trying to address the very valid concerns around noise complaints and parking, etc., but do we actually have data around the existence of Airbnbs and a correlation to more crime in the city of Brisbane? And I don't know.
Maybe that's something we can ask staff, if they can do a little research.
But I think that's, you raise valid concerns, but I have no idea.
Right, so
sure. Yeah, we'll just.
Well, are you going to reopen public?
Are we going to reopen
public?
No, we'll just let one person come up and speak, I think. No, please come up,
please.
To the mic.
But I've also been in the vacation rental business for about 12 years with properties in Florida and Lake Tahoe.
Excuse me, did you say your name, please?
I'm sorry, no, I didn't.
Okay.
Olga Alexander.
Okay.
So I kind of am familiar to this. I proposed this to a councilman about maybe 5 years ago. I told them that they should be looking into it because it would generate revenue for the city. And as long as it's controlled with a permit, I think that you would be okay. You might have problems with parking. So the pros and the cons, okay? As long as you provide strict or some sort of regulations for the owners to assume responsibility on their tenants, you won't have problems with the neighbors. Do you understand? And you will generate the revenue for you, for the city, and for the owners. So if you tell them, okay, there's noise ordinance, no noise after 8 o'clock, no more than so many cars, so many guests per room. Let's say you have a house that you fully rent, correct? You have 4 bedrooms. So like in Tahoe, they do, okay, 2 per room, so that's 8 plus 4, because you can have maybe bunk beds or a living room or something, but they tie it together with parking.
And that's in our ordinance, yes.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what your ordinance is. I'm sorry I was late. I forgot. I was working and I saw like, oh, isn't it today? I thought that you could get valuable information from me because I've been doing it for so long. So I have 3 cities that I go through permits with. So they all have, sometimes, Tahoe's going beyond strict. Now they're going wild, crazy. But it's good to have boundaries, parameters, and rules, because otherwise they'll go wacko. And then in my case, I make them sign a strict contract. So the people that will come, whether it's Airbnb or VRBO or Booking or whomever delivers that, I interview the people, and I said, by the way, there's strict ordinances here. You're gonna pay fines unless you adhere to those policies, and the contract means, and I'm, we can kick you out any moment if you violate any of these things. In Tahoe, they're going crazy in the sense of they're really good. They have like a 24/7 call thing. Like, for example, the other day I was wherever, and I get a call by a robot saying, there's a violation of parking, and you have 30 minutes to correct this. Contact your guest. Boom. So then you immediately, because the neighbors are watchdogs, and they go into this hotline, and they call it in, and then whatever they do.
So you're saying in Tahoe they have a hotline that
They
the
have
neighbors
a
can
24-hour
call in?
hotline.
Okay.
I don't know what it will cost. It's probably not expensive, because the neighbors, which are probably complaining here, they don't want to have it maybe or something. They don't want to be bothered. As long as you have those regulations in place, you won't have a problem.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Commissioner Gomez, you want to continue with what you're saying?
Thank you for the comments, Olga. I didn't see anything around a hotline.
No.
I missed that?
No,
She's saying that they have one in different.
That's a best practice. Is that a best practice?
She said in Tahoe they have it.
Yeah, so I guess the question is, if that's a best practice for helping with overall, code enforcement, what's the cost? Is that a costly practice to employ? Because it would seem to me that could really help.
Right.
With
so
code enforcement.
I agree with your analysis on that part. I think this whole thing in Brisbane where enforcement falls on the neighbors who have to deal with it at 11 o'clock at night or have to call multiple times, I don't think that's a workable solution. I also don't think it's a workable solution that enforcement's going to be based on neighborhood policing by neighbors, that people are illegally renting out their houses on Airbnb or VRBO. So I think that there has to be some sort of other enforcement analysis besides we're just going to rely on how Brisbane's always done it, which is people have to complain all the time.
I agree with the sentiment. However, I don't think it's feasible to shift the burden to any other specific people I can identify in the city system to be cruising up and down the streets at 11 o'clock at night trying to figure out who belongs in the house and who doesn't. So I think it's, as a matter of reality, the whole problem with Airbnbs and short-term rentals is they create a friction between the existing neighborhood and the long-time neighborhood and the people who are employing this new thing that we have, this sort of envelope-pushing thing that allows people to supplement their income by renting out their houses. There's going to be a friction no matter what you do with it, and the only way I think that you can, allow the governing entity, which is the city of Brisbane, to do anything about it, is to get a complaint and then adjudicate it. I would love to hear any other version of how to do it.
That's the problem, though. For example, I'll give you an example right now as it relates to parking. Okay, so if you in the city of Brisbane, if someone parks their car, they park their car on your street and they go to the airport. Okay, so you have to wait 3 days for them to call code enforcement because a car is allowed to be on the street for 72 hours or something like that, right? Then the city waits another 3 days before they put a sticker on it, and then they wait another amount of time before anything is done. So if anyone's going on a weekend trip, their best bet is to go to Brisbane and park their car for a week.
Do you have a solution?
Yeah, the solution should be if someone calls and says, hey, this car's been parked here for 3 days, they take their name down and be like, you're a witness that this car's been here parked 3 days, and they tow it. Because now you have someone that is saying, like, I can testify to the fact that it's been parked here for 3 days. But rather than doing that, you have to wait a week, and so everyone gets a free week. So people in that neighborhood have to deal with it for a week.
So how do we translate that notion to something like short-term rentals?
So I think in terms of enforcement, I think that if we're going to have people that are being that are going to be paying for permits, then there should be someone on the staff that's regularly monitoring the major online programs such as VRBO, Booking.com, or Airbnb, looking for rentals randomly, sporadically that are not permitted, and those people should get fined, independent of people in town going through and policing their neighborhood. So if we're going to be creating this system, then maybe we should include fees that supports that type of monitoring, rather than putting all of the burden on people in the neighborhood.
And I did have some thoughts on that I noted when I was going through this draft ordinance. So, Ken, if you could, before our next meeting on this issue, look into, in terms of tracking and enforcement, to see if we can have like a central location where any written or oral complaints on this issue be logged, so that we keep track of all this, as well as any official citations. So for example, if there's a parking ticket, we would require the police officer to somehow connect it to look up if this car is associated with this particular residence that's part of a short-term rental. So that way we get all the information, regarding possible violations. So I had initially talked to Julia if we could do something online and make it more public, but she said that usually complaints are kept private. So I think the best way for us to do this is we're going to have to rely on staff to either designate someone, or if there's not enough resources, we have to hire an extra person using fees or whatnot to handle this. So that was one thing. And also, the draft ordinance also refers to penalties, and penalties that we would apply to other typical violations. I'd like to kind of tease that out more. Like, for example, what is the penalty? Fines, and, for a first, violation, a second or third. Because I think if someone is a repeat offender, I think we need to go down hard on them, because we don't want to have the behavior continue. So if, staff can look into that, or if there's no, so that we can kind of get an idea of what the potential penalties are right now.
So the fees are established in Title I of the Municipal Code for administrative violations. It starts at $100 for first time, then it goes to $300, then it goes to $500, and it could repeat and repeat and repeat. So once it goes to $500, it continues at $500. Generally, people want to correct before they get into that $500 range, but there's also language in this ordinance as to misdemeanors. And how that would be handled, I think, is case by case and really subject to the city attorney. But definitely, I can take these comments back to the rest of staff, and we can talk more in depth on this at our next meeting on this.
Okay. And I think the other commissioners and I may have other sort of more detailed questions, or maybe more small questions or tweaking questions. That the best process might be for us to just independently email staff, so that the next meeting you're prepared with those questions, and we don't ask you on February 27th. You say, okay, well, let's go think about them. We can probably save some time and send those to you ahead of time, and give you folks a decent chance to come up with an answer anyway.
That sounds good.
Can I pipe in with a couple? I'm going to just go a little overview because I haven't said anything about this yet. Concerns about crime, trafficking. I've spoken to the police chief. She knows about trafficking of people in the area. We've had hotels in South City, 2 of them, twice, that they broke trafficking rings, prostitution in hotels, just south of Brisbane, right down the road. So that is something I don't, like Commissioner Gomez said, we don't know, but I think it should be part of the picture to evaluate. That's pretty serious. Can't say it won't happen here. Illegal rentals. Thank you for illuminating us on the violations. I think they should compound. I have a couple other different things. I think when we talk about issuing a permit, unfortunately, Commissioner Patel, where you talk about the public being the genesis of policing, I don't think that's going to end. The same thing you would encounter with a neighbor or a rental house next door to you, that would always be the case. But I think the difficulty, which we've heard from people who were kind enough to show up tonight, is who do you call, who do you talk to? So I would make a suggestion we consider when a permit is issued, it says in here notification goes to all the neighbors, that it include a reporting number where any problems or violations, they call this number. And that all of those violations are logged by the person that takes the phone calls or email. Because here's my other concern. When I asked the one gentleman, so when you called the police, did they cite the people? We don't know. And sometimes the police just go, hey, pipe down, be quiet. That reporting is never going to go to the city. There's no connection. And what if they cite the short-term renter and not the property owner? And the property owner goes, I never knew there was a problem. So we need to have a reporting mechanism, and the police officer is not going to know it's a short-term rental. So somehow any police calls to an address then need to be funneled to that person that takes the complaint line, that's pretty easy to do. There has to be a way to tie them together. So that's one thing. My other concern is tracking the rentals for collection of the transit occupancy tax, and I don't know if Airbnb has it, but I'd like to know if I'm a renter of Airbnb, if at the end of a year I can print out all the rentals that I listed and rented for a given calendar year as proof that I collected tax on these. And I don't know if that's available on any of those, so that I'm not handing the city my list of who I rented to, but something that's really printed out from a listing site. I have another something no one's brought up. Loss of rentals, regular long-term rentals to short-term rentals. So now we have new laws this year that say you can only raise the rents with the, what's it based on? The 10% right now this year. So what if I say, this is awful. I'm just going to get rid of the tenant and just do short-term rentals. I'm going to make more money. And we end up losing good rental properties for tenants. And that's something that everybody is a little bit concerned about, short-term rentals taking away long-term rentals. And it's been proven in San Francisco, New York City. You can go online and get the statistics. It's really happening because of that. And I might play devil's advocate and say, well, if my whole goal in a rental I have is to make money, why wouldn't I? So here's my question for staff. There are in the new rental regulations passed by California state law that protect the renters. There are more stringent stipulations on how and why someone can be legally evicted. It's not so flippant as, I just don't want you here anymore. So would these new laws apply to landlords who want to convert rentals to STRs as a way to make more money?
Well, I don't know the long-term or the final answer, but there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts about the new law. For example, it doesn't apply to single-family dwellings, doesn't apply to duplexes or fourplexes in which the owner is one of the occupants. So
Right.
a lot of the places that wind up on the short-term rental market would be exempted from the new California law anyway, so you don't really have that kind of protection. So
Thank you for adding that. I didn't think about that.
There's ifs, ands, or buts about it. And the real problem with this is we have this tension here between we need housing,
Right.
and folks think they have an inviolate right to make money on their property, and that, both of them can't be true. And I think this ordinance is an attempt to start getting arms around it to say you can exploit, but you can use your property to a certain extent, but not when it unfairly impacts or excessively impacts your neighbors. That's a delicate balance.
And in what you're saying, I think the difficulty, as just an observation, is that we have, from the surveys, 50% of people in town want it, 50% don't. So let's just take out short-term rentals and say you have a rental property. You might have a tenant next door that you can't stand, you're going to live with for 3 years next door to you. So it's not a perfect world. But I think the best that we can do here is we need a lot of input from the public. We've got people, thank you for anyone who came here tonight, whether you're listing, the gentleman that's listing already, and those that are seemingly getting the impacts. We need to know what the concerns are, what your experiences are, in order to build this model to get the strictest and most well-run outcome, so that it won't be perfect, but we have addressed a lot of the major concerns. And that's the best we can do for you, because I think it's chasing the unknown to say that if we just say there's no short-term rentals, that we're not going to have people listing them again.
It does highlight, the conversation the two of you were having does highlight one fact, though. With this new law, will people be more incentivized to take their single-family homes or their duplexes and make them short-term rentals versus long-term rentals? Because now you're capped, right? Whereas under short-term rentals, you could hypothetically increase the amount that you're charging per month or per week at any time. So will it exacerbate, whatever the word, that word.
Make worse?
Yeah, make worse the issues already.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important to have some policing mechanism for the unhosted limitations that are in this ordinance, because the real, I think, the rank or the most egregious abuses of short-term rentals by absentee owners is the fact that they are absentee and they're unhosted and they don't know or care what's going on. And so having that enforced and having pretty strict provisions about that and strict caps on it. Right now it's 60 days. I question whether why that many, frankly. But anyway, that needs to be policed, and probably by neighbors, really. I don't know much other way. We're not going to have a STR police cruising the neighborhood.
Well, but we also need to make it very clear that the enforcement of the requirements of the permit are going to be adhered to and followed through, and not where people go, I can just foresee I'm going to be calling forever and nothing's going to happen.
Right.
That is not acceptable. I would not want to have to deal with
If
that.
it is going to be policed by neighbors, there has to be a way that it can be done easily by neighbors, and it's not like this uphill battle for them to get anything done.
And not knowing who to call. So if it's one number or an email, that serves that purpose. All funneled into one place.
Yeah, and I think a big problem that we've learned from the gentleman that came up here talking about his short-term renters is, how do you distinguish if it's the owner that's throwing a big party versus a short-term renter. When is it okay to have lots of people in your house, and how would you, again, police or enforce that? I think that's another very big problem we're going to have, if we authorize this. So
it strikes me that no matter who's there at the time, if you're violating the noise ordinance, you're violating the noise ordinance. Okay. And the neighbor could call the police and they respond, and hopefully that gets corrected and nipped in the bud. I guess at that time it's probably too late because it's already been an impact, but yeah, a violation is a violation no matter who's there.
So in our current proposed ordinance, both the host and the renter gets notified of a violation. Is that correct?
I'd have to look at how that is, but I'm referring really to the noise ordinance that's contained in Title 8 of the code, which isn't really dealing with whether it's a renter or a SD, short-term renter or a owner or who.
So.
Sure.
It might be feasible. This is perhaps just a matter of getting the right hand to talk to the left hand. If a police officer responding to a complaint is advised by the complainant that it's a short-term rental, to trigger a police protocol that they simply report that to code enforcement.
Or that police and whoever the permitting body is for short-term rentals, they have communication as to which units in Brisbane are permitted.
Whoever that is, whether it's code enforcement or whoever is designated to hear that it's just part of that call.
And that be logged under their permit, so that if there is a renewal permit, that there be some inquiry as to all of the complaints as it relates to that particular short-term rental.
That strikes me as a not terribly burdensome thing to put on the police officer, just to pop a note to somebody in community development department, however we designate that, to say, this goes on the file of.
So I have one other question I'd like.
000 Kings Road.
Yeah, fellow commissioners. So, say you're doing unhosted rentals, and that may be the least prevalent situation we come across, any difficulties. But so you have an unhosted rental, and let's say you're not even in the country. Someone has a big party. Police are called. Everyone contacts this designated number. And as the host or the owner, I come back in town and I'm called by City Hall, who says, you had such a horrible situation, violation. And I say, it's not my fault. I wasn't there. It's not my responsibility. If I'm doing unhosted and those people act up, people will do bad things. Am I, as an owner, to be held responsible on unhosted rentals? Because it's a different situation where you have a hosted rental where it is your responsibility to take care of the situation. And even with a contact person, I'm just concerned about the legality here that an unhosted, and could even have two unhosted while they're gone, that they maybe have problems with both. And they go, not my problem. I wasn't there. I can't be held liable for people's bad behavior or their guests. They weren't even my renters. They were the guests that they had. Well, so you can't issue me 2 violations and take away my permit. So I'm just saying, esoterically, are we going to hold the owners liable and violations for unhosted
That's
rental
what ultimately the burden of picking who you're renting to as a long-term renter or a short-term renter, or who you're going to be employing as a person that's going to be an employee, that rests on the person that's taking that action. And I believe that once that they take that action, it's their responsibility to make sure that they're renting to people that are responsible. To the extent that they are not taking that due diligence and they are being held liable by either not getting a renewal permit on the next round or whatever it is, that's on them.
Okay. Yeah, and I would I believe it's in the draft ordinance, but, that's something that I want to make sure that is in there, is that it doesn't matter if it's hosted or unhosted, the owner is also liable. In terms of, I don't know who we find. I'm assuming it's the host that allowed the short term. We find that person, and they get dinged for whatever amount of violations, and if it ends up in a suspension or revocation, it's on them, because if they're away, the contact person should be dealing with it as if they were there themselves. So, and I think it's addressed, and I think so we just have to see if it's strong enough. I think if we look into this more, but yeah. Any other questions or concerns?
Just one last comment. I think it's important that we also convey we're not pro or against short-term rentals. If we are to permit them, we want the permit holders to be good neighbors and very responsible, and they have to earn that trust of their neighbors and holding that permit. And if they're not good partners in that permit goes away. And that I think is the important issue here, that we have to stress. That's what we want.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, we can argue these, or we can discuss these things ad infinitum, but looking at the unhosted stays section of the proposed ordinance, it's not real clear. Maybe I'm wrong about this. I love being corrected when I am, because it means that they're doing their job at writing a good ordinance. But it's not clear to me that how an unhosted situation gets reported or held accountable easily, because the contact person is not going to be known to the people who are complaining. It's not going to be known probably to the police officer responding to the party noise complaint. And by the time anything ever cycles back to hold anybody accountable, it's long past the 30 minutes within which the contact person should be available.
But designated phone number, email for complaints, violations.
But that's not going to be manned 24 hours a day in the real world,
No.
So might just be a real life problem we're stuck with.
I think you had. Prem was trying to get.
Oh, sorry. Please.
Right. Prem Lau, Brisbane resident. I just wanted to know if, because these permits are, once you give them to the residents who have these homes, are they revocable? And if so, do you have a precise list of criteria for which you do?
The ordinance.
Okay, because the second point is that if they do have their permit revoked and then they start doing Airbnb or VRBO again, is it possible to significantly jack up the amount they would be fined, to say instead of $500 to $10,000, so that it would prevent people from who have been getting fines and therefore had their permits revoked from just saying, oh, well, I don't care, I don't need a permit, I'm just going to go back on your Airbnb again. If they know they're going to be fined, in that case, $10,000 instead of $500, I'm sure that would be a disincentive.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for. Okay, do one more? Yeah.
Are you reopening?
Yeah, I think so. Sure, Miss. I can't read you. Oh, Deb Horn. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, please.
Hi, Deb Horn, Brisbane resident. I was in my pajamas, so please excuse me. I've just thrown my jacket on.
You could have come here in your pajamas.
I am. Anyway, I've been watching and listening, and the reason is because several of you know that I have had an Airbnb for a number of years. No longer, so I stopped last year. But I do want to react to a couple things I heard. First off, in December 1st, 2014, I received a notice that this was an illegal activity. So I immediately went down to City Hall to find out about it because I didn't know. In December 12, 2014, I received another letter from the city that said, well, we haven't approved it, but we're not enforcing it. We're in discussion. I was invited to a lot of those discussions. I've been involved for years. January 22nd, 2015, another letter from the city saying, well, we're not enforcing it, we're in discussion. So none of these Airbnb people have done something illegally, knowingly illegally. I just want to make that clear.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I have a couple more things. It seems from the complaint you hear, it's the unhosted situations that create the problems. I mean, I'm appalled to hear about what's going on here in Brisbane because I don't want that happening to my neighbors. I'm no longer doing Airbnb because I don't have the time, because I made sure everything was okay and nobody was bothered in any way. I think that's important. I don't know why we need to have an unhosted solution here in Brisbane. Because, Colleen, to your question, what if they come back and go, I wasn't here, I didn't know? Well, you do know if you live in the building. And it's not going to happen if you're in the building. So anyway, just ran down just to give that 2 cents.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I don't think there was clarity around whether there was advisements, whether it was being allowed or not allowed, and I think that does provide some clarity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
City record.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, sure. Please, quickly.
I do have a question regarding the violations. Like, you guys have, like, what is it, 100, 300, 500, or something like that?
That's correct. I'm fuzzy now after I said that. On the second violation, it may actually be 200.
Okay.
1, 2, 5.
Well, you know,
somewhere
with
in there.
a lot of these Airbnb, when there is a violation, a lot of times they could just push it on to their guests and make it a fine or whatever, that they disturbed the noise or, you know, disturbed the peace or did whatever, and just push it on to the guests. So if they did that, I mean, what prevents them from doing it again? Or, I mean, there wouldn't be any penalty to the owner.
Well, do you know for a fact that Airbnb has the ability to enforce that kind of retroactive penalty?
If you look in the Airbnb, there's a lot of terms that the owner can put in there saying, okay, if you did this and that, you'd be penalized your deposit, which is 500 or whatever deposit they set. So a lot of these fees can be pushed on to the renter. But what about the owner of the property? How do they get penalized? And okay, how many times do after getting these violations will they be suspended or revoked or whatever?
It's in there. It's 2 for suspension, 3 for revocation.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so.
I wanted to address that. It is not possible to pass it on to the guest. The only time you can force a guest to pay, through Airbnb at least, maybe it's different on booking, I'm not familiar with that, is when you have documented proof that a guest damaged something in your property with proof of cost to repair or replace. So for any kind of code violation, there's no way for you as a host to pass it on to the guest. Currently on Airbnb. Second, I fully support the notion of the owner and the operator to be liable for any violation that the guest would undergo or commit. As the host, I'm responsible for who's renting, especially on a short-term rental, so I'm in full support of that. Additionally, personally, if I was making this rule, I would jack up the penalty from the 500 to something a bit higher. I mean, 500 is a lot of money, but if I'm able to rent out my place for $200 a night, that's 3 nights, and I'm already back in the clear. So why not consider more of a penalty? And finally, make it so that it's documented and immediate violation or revoking of the permit, so they can no longer rent. Last comment, And this is just me thinking. I'd have to double check that. I'm positive, almost positive, that Airbnb has an option for it to block rentals from showing up unless they have a registered permit number on there. So that would address that ability of enforcement without a permit. So
thank you very much. Okay, so we will continue this hearing until February. So for now, we'll turn to the next item on the agenda, which is items initiated by staff.
There are a few items I'll mention. So the Planning Commission saw the REACH code, the adoption of the 2019 building code, and the REACH codes come through this body a few months ago. That passed council last month, and the 2020 code is now in effect as of January 1st. That's a statewide thing. And then we also have a couple of REACH codes that have to do with building electrification and electric vehicle infrastructure and solar on commercial buildings. So the building electrification part and solar still goes on to the California Energy Commission, and they have that. They're reviewing that now. Baylands GPA is going to City Council next week. League of California Cities event is coming up. I think you guys might have heard about that. If not, you should be hearing from staff more on that. I don't have the details with me, but and then we have ethics training coming up, the first meeting in February, and I'll get to that more in a moment. We have a new associate planner coming on board on Monday, so very, very happy about that. We'll introduce you to him in the near future here. His name's Jeremiah. And we'll have election of officers coming up next month.
Okay.
So that'll be agendized. So, so when we get to adjournment, after items initiated by commission, I'll suggest how we reword the adjournment to the next meeting. So I'll come back to that.
Okay.
Do you know what the dates are for the ethics training?
Yes.
You've probably told us before, and it's my fault for not writing it down.
It's going to be February 13th. That's your regular Thursday evening.
Oh, just part of the regular.
But it's in advance, so it'll be a 6 o'clock start time.
Okay.
And then we'd have a 8 o'clock start time for the regular meeting, because it's going to take a bit of time. So what we'll do is, due to schedules and Julia gone, we're going to be looking to cancel the meeting of January 23rd, adjourn to the meeting of February 13th, but it'll be to that 6 o'clock start time for ethics train with an 8 o'clock start time for the others. So we'll have you do a motion second when we get to that.
Thank you.
Okay, items initiated by the Commission. Okay, we have none. So next is we will adjourn to our next meeting of February 13th at 8 p.m.
So clarify. So we'll cancel the meeting of January 23rd, and we'll adjourn to February 13th, special time of 6 p.m. for ethics training. Sorry, I should have given you notes on this. And 8 p.m. for the regular.
Okay. May I have a motion to adjourn until the February 13th meeting?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.